The transport ship Galactic Harmony hummed through the void between stars, carrying its precious cargo of diplomatic delegates toward what many hoped would be humanity's first successful alliance with an alien civilization. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the massive viewport in the observation deck, watching the purple and gold swirls of hyperspace flow past like cosmic rivers. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Marcus Webb, the mission's xenobiologist, as he joined her at the window. Sarah's reflection smiled back at her from the reinforced glass. "Excited, actually. The Cathara have been monitoring our broadcasts for decades. They know more about us than we do about them." What they did know was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The Cathara Empire controlled 17 star systems and had achieved interstellar travel 3 centuries before humanity even discovered fire. Their society was built around strength, honor, and the pack mentality of their apex predator companions, the Fenris wolves. Each adult Cathara was bonded with one of these massive creatures from birth. Standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder and weighing close to 300 pounds, a Fenris wolf possessed intelligence that rivaled many sentient species. Their loyalty to their Cathara partner was absolute, their protective instincts legendary, and their capacity for violence when threatened was the stuff of nightmares. The briefing said their delegation leader, War Alpha Zethkar, has been bonded with the same Fenris for over 40 years, Marcus continued, consulting his tablet. The wolf's name translates roughly to Shadow of Death. Not exactly cuddly. Sarah turned from the window as Captain Rodriguez's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All diplomatic personnel to stations. We're dropping out of hyperspace in T-minus 30 minutes. The next half hour passed in a blur of final preparations. Sarah reviewed her notes on Cathara customs one last time while the security team performed their equipment checks. The plan was simple. Meet the Cathara delegation at the neutral station orbiting the gas giant Kepler 442b, demonstrate humanity's commitment to peaceful cooperation, and hopefully secure a trade agreement that would benefit both species. What could possibly go wrong? The docking bay of Station Concordia was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate vessels from dozens of different species. As the Galactic Harmony settled into its berth, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the Cathara ship through the observation port. The vessel was a thing of dark beauty, its hull carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the station's artificial lighting. "Showtime," muttered Security Chief Torres, checking his sidearm one final time. The human delegation assembled in the airlock. Ambassador Chen, Dr. Webb, Chief Torres, and 3 junior diplomats. Sarah had specifically requested a small team. The Cathara valued directness and saw large entourages as signs of weakness or deception. The airlock cycled, and they stepped into the neutral meeting chamber. The room was spacious but sparse, with a simple metal table surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. At the far end, another airlock was opening. War Alpha Zethkar entered first, and Sarah had to suppress her instinctual step backward. The Cathara stood nearly 8 feet tall, his muscular frame covered in gray-green scales that gleamed under the chamber's lights. His elongated skull bore ritual scars that marked his rank, and his amber eyes held the calculating intelligence of a born predator. He wore simple, dark armor adorned with the curved claws of defeated enemies, but it was the creature that padded silently beside him that made every human in the room tense. Shadow of Death lived up to his name. The Fenris wolf was enormous, his midnight black fur seeming to absorb the light around him. Scarred muzzle and missing left ear spoke of countless battles, while eyes like golden coins tracked every movement in the room with predatory focus. When he moved, there was no sound. 300 pounds of perfectly controlled lethality flowing across the metal floor like liquid darkness. "Ambassador Chen," Zethkar's voice was a low rumble. his English heavily accented but clear. "I am War Alpha Zethkar of the 3rd Talent Fleet. This is my bond brother, Grackmore." Sarah stepped forward with what she hoped was confident dignity. "War Alpha, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Ambassador Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Federation." The ritual exchange of credentials proceeded smoothly, but Sarah was acutely aware of the massive wolf's unwavering attention. Grackmore hadn't moved from Zethkar's side, but his golden eyes tracked her every gesture. When she reached into her jacket for her diplomatic credentials, the wolf's lips pulled back slightly, revealing fangs the size of her fingers. "Your beast is impressive," Chief Torres commented, trying to sound casual. Zethkar's expression darkened. "Grackmore is not a beast. He is my brother, my equal, my other half. Among our people, to insult one's bondmate is to offer mortal challenge." "No insult intended," Sarah interjected quickly. "Chief Torres meant only to express admiration. We understand the sacred nature of the bond you share." The War Alpha studied her for a long moment before nodding curtly. "Good, then we may proceed. But first, as is traditional, Grackmore must assess your worthiness." "Assess our worthiness?" Dr. Webb squeaked, his face going pale. "The Fenris see truth that escapes even Kithara senses," Zethkar explained. "If Grackmore deems you honorable, we may negotiate as equals. If not..." He left the implications hanging in the air like a sword. Sarah felt sweat gathering at the base of her neck as the massive wolf began to move. Grackmore approached the human delegation with fluid grace, his massive head held high as he scented the air. He stopped before Chief Torres first, and the security officer stood rigidly at attention as the wolf sniffed around his boots and belt. After several tense seconds, Grackmore moved on without reaction. Apparently, Torres had passed. Dr. Webb was next, and the poor scientist looked ready to faint as the Fenris investigated him thoroughly. Again, the wolf moved on without incident. When Grackmore approached Sarah, she forced herself to remain perfectly still despite every instinct screaming at her to run. The wolf was even more imposing up close. His shoulder came nearly to her chest, and she could see her reflection in those intelligent golden eyes. His breath was warm against her hands as he sniffed carefully around her, taking in her scent and something else, something deeper. Then something unexpected happened. Grackmore's rigid posture relaxed slightly. His massive head tilted to one side, ears pricking forward with what almost looked like curiosity. He took another step closer, close enough that Sarah could feel the heat radiating from his fur, and made a soft sound that was almost a whine? Zethkar's amber eyes widened in surprise. "Curious," he muttered in his own language before switching back to English. "Grackmore finds you interesting, Ambassador. This is unusual. The Fenris are not easily impressed by off-worlders." Sarah remained motionless as the great wolf continued his inspection, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple assessment. There was something almost familiar about the way Grackmore was behaving, something that reminded her of her childhood. Growing up on the agricultural colony of New Montana, Sarah had been surrounded by working animals. Her family's ranch had employed everything from horses to specially bred canines for herding and protection. She'd learned early that animals responded to confidence, calm energy, and respect. Even the most aggressive guard dog would settle around someone who understood pack dynamics and showed proper deference without fear. Without thinking, Sarah slowly extended her right hand, palm down, fingers slightly curled. It was a gesture she'd used 1,000 times with unfamiliar dogs, an offer of introduction that showed no threat while maintaining respectful distance. The effect on Grackmore was immediate. His ears came forward even more, and he stretched his massive neck to sniff delicately at her fingers. For a moment that stretched like eternity, wolf and human regarded each other in perfect stillness. Then Grackmore did something that made Zethkar's jaw literally drop open. The massive Fenris wolf lowered his great head and gently touched his nose to Sarah's palm. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Even the ambient hum of the station's life support systems seemed to fade as everyone stared at the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. "Impossible," Zethkar breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "In 43 years, Grackmore has never... He does not submit to anyone except..." He couldn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. In Cathara society, a Fenris wolf acknowledging someone other than their bondmate was unheard of. It was like watching a force of nature decide to change course simply because someone asked nicely. Sarah kept her hand perfectly still as Grackmore continued his gentle investigation of her palm. The wolf's expression, if such a predator could be said to have expressions, was one of puzzled recognition, as if he was remembering something important that he couldn't quite place. "War Alpha," Sarah said softly, not wanting to break whatever spell had settled over the scene. "What does this mean?" Zethkar was staring at his bond brother with an expression of complete bewilderment. I do not know. In all the histories of our people, in all the sacred texts of the bonding rituals, there is no precedent for this behavior. Grackmore acknowledges you as pack." The implications of those words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Pack hierarchy was everything to the Cathara. It determined social status, political power, even marriage compatibility. If Grackmore was acknowledging her as pack, it meant... "This changes everything," Dr. Webb whispered, voicing what everyone in the room was thinking. Grackmore finally stepped back from Sarah, but his golden eyes remained fixed on her face with an intensity that was both flattering and terrifying. The great wolf settled into a sitting position at Zethkar's side, but his attention remained focused on the human ambassador. "Perhaps," Zethkar said slowly, "the negotiations will be more interesting than anticipated." As the formal diplomatic protocols resumed and both delegations took their seats around the meeting table, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. The way Grackmore continued to watch her, the way Zethkar kept glancing between her and his bondmate with growing fascination, it was clear that this mission had already gone far beyond anything the briefings had prepared her for. But as she opened her negotiation materials and began the careful dance of interstellar diplomacy, Sarah found herself oddly excited by the unexpected turn of events. Whatever was happening between her and the Fenris wolf, it felt significant in ways that went far beyond trade agreements and political alliances. She just hoped she was ready for wherever this strange new path might lead. The negotiations had been proceeding smoothly for 3 hours when everything went sideways. Sarah was in the middle of explaining humanity's agricultural capabilities when the station's emergency lights began flashing red. A harsh klaxon sounded twice before Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the communication system. "All personnel to emergency stations. We have multiple hostile contacts approaching the system. This is not a drill." War Alpha Zethkar was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the ceremonial blade at his side. Grackmore rose with fluid grace, every muscle in his powerful frame suddenly coiled for action. The wolf's golden eyes had gone cold and predatory, scanning the chamber for threats that existed beyond the station's walls. "What ships?" Zethkar demanded, his diplomatic composure replaced by the bearing of a military commander. Chief Torres was already consulting his emergency communicator. 3 vessels, unknown configuration. They dropped out of hyperspace just outside the asteroid belt and are accelerating toward us." Through the chamber's viewport, Sarah could see the distant flashes of the station's defensive systems coming online. Energy shields shimmered into existence around the massive structure, while automated turrets emerged from hidden housing. "Cathara patrol ships?" Sarah asked hopefully. Zethkar's expression was grim. None are scheduled in this sector, and the Concordia Accords prohibit armed vessels during diplomatic meetings. He activated his own communicator and spoke rapidly in his native language. After a moment, he switched back to English. My ship's sensors identify them as Sector raiders. Dr. Webb went pale. The slave traders? Worse, Zethkar replied. The Sector view both humans and Kithara as valuable commodities. If they capture this station, every being aboard will be sold in the Outer Rim markets. Sarah's mind raced through their options. The Galactic Harmony was a diplomatic vessel with minimal defensive capabilities. The Kithara ship was better armed but designed for escort duty rather than pitched battle. Against 3 raider vessels, their chances were grim. We need to evacuate, Chief Torres said, already moving toward the airlock. No. The voice was Sarah's, but it surprised even her with its firmness. If we run now, we lose any chance of completing the alliance. The Sector will report our presence to their criminal networks, and this opportunity will never come again. Zethkar studied her with renewed interest. You propose we fight? I propose we survive together. Your ship and mine working in coordination might have enough firepower to drive them off. And if we fail? Sarah met his amber gaze steadily. Then we fail together as allies should. Something shifted in the War Alpha's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Grackmore chose well, he said simply. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the station shuddered under weapons fire. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red as the deck plates vibrated beneath their feet. The shields are holding, Torres reported, but not for long. We need to move. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Both delegations retreated to their respective ships as the station's defenses engaged the attacking raiders. Sarah found herself on the bridge of the Galactic Harmony alongside Captain Rodriguez and his crew, watching the tactical display with growing dread. The Sector raiders were sophisticated opponents. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, systematically dismantling the station's automated defenses while avoiding return fire with practiced ease. These weren't desperate pirates. They were professional hunters with military-grade equipment and the experience to use it effectively. Kithara vessel Night Hunter is moving to intercept, reported the sensor operator. On the main screen, Zethkar's ship emerged from the station's shadow like its namesake. The vessel was sleek and predatory, its dark hull bristling with weapons that spoke of a warrior culture's approach to starship design. Energy lances reached out from its prow, striking the nearest raider with devastating effect. But even as the first Sector ship reeled under the assault, the other 2 were moving to flank the Night Hunter. Their return fire hammered against the Kithara shields, forcing Zethkar's ship to break off its attack run. They're trying to disable, not destroy, Captain Rodriguez observed. They want the ships intact. Sarah gripped the armrest of her chair as another impact shook the station. Captain, can we assist the Night Hunter? Our weapons are defensive only. We might as well throw rocks at them. Then we get creative. Sarah turned to the communications officer. Open a channel to War Alpha Zethkar. The Kithara commander appeared on screen, his bridge lit by the glow of combat displays. Behind him, Grackmore stood like a statue, his golden eyes fixed on something beyond the camera's range. Ambassador, Zethkar acknowledged. You should evacuate while you can. My ship will buy you time to reach minimum safe distance for hyperspace jump. Negative, War Alpha. We're staying. Sarah took a deep breath. But I have an idea. Your ship has superior firepower, but you're outnumbered. What if we could even the odds? How? Sarah explained her plan quickly. It was desperate, possibly suicidal, but it was their only chance. The Galactic Harmony would use its diplomatic transponder codes to appear as a neutral vessel requesting assistance. When the raiders moved to intercept, thinking they had easy prey, the Night Hunter would emerge from the station's sensor shadow for a coordinated strike. It requires precise timing, Zethkar said after a moment. "And trust. If we miss the window, your ship will be captured." "Then don't miss," Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. The next few minutes tested everyone's nerves. The Galactic Harmony departed the station broadcasting distress signals, appearing to flee in panic. Two of the raider ships immediately broke off from their assault on the Night Hunter to pursue what seemed like helpless prey. Sarah watched the tactical display as the enemy vessels closed distance. "Steady," she murmured as Captain Rodriguez's hands hovered over the helm controls. "Steady." At the last possible moment, the Galactic Harmony executed a sharp turn that brought its minimal weapons to bear while the Night Hunter erupted from concealment like an avenging ghost. The coordinated assault caught the raiders completely off guard, crippling one vessel and forcing the others to break formation. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining sector ships regrouped quickly, and their return fire was devastating. The Night Hunter took multiple hits, its shields flickering under the concentrated assault. "Cathara's ship is venting atmosphere," the sensor operator reported grimly. "Their weapons are offline." Sarah watched in horror as the raiders moved in for the kill. Zethkar's ship was dead in space, defenseless against the incoming attack. In moments, the Cathara crew would be dead or captured. Then she noticed something on the display that made her heart skip a beat. "Captain, the station's central reactor. Can we overload it?" Rodriguez followed her gaze to the tactical schematic. "Theoretically, yes, but the explosion would destroy everything within 50,000 kilometers. Including us." "Including us." Sarah stared at the screen, weighing impossible choices. 300 people aboard the station, probably already dead. Zethkar and his crew about to join them. Her own people facing the same fate, or one desperate gamble that might save some of them. "Do it!" she ordered. "Ambassador, do it now, Captain. Full evacuation of the station survivors to both ships, then overload the reactor. The blast wave should disable the Raiders' ships without destroying them. And if we don't reach minimum safe distance in time? Then we die trying to do the right thing." Captain Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You heard the ambassador. All departments, prepare for emergency evacuation protocol." The next hour was controlled chaos. Rescue shuttles flew between the dying station and both starships, evacuating survivors under fire from the frustrated raiders. The sector had realized what was happening, but they were caught between wanting to stop the evacuation and needing to capture valuable ships intact. Sarah found herself aboard a shuttle heading for the Night Hunter, ostensibly to coordinate the joint evacuation, but really because she couldn't bear to abandon Zethkar and his crew to their fate. The Cathara ship was worse off than the sensors had indicated. Hull breaches, failing life support, and a crew fighting desperately to keep their vessel operational. She found Zethkar on his bridge, one arm hanging useless at his side while blood seeped through his armor. Grackmore stood guard beside his bondmate, the great wolf's eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like golden coins. "Ambassador," Zethkar said as she entered, "you should not have come." "Yes, I should have," Sarah replied, moving to the communications station. "How many crew do you have left?" 43. 17 wounded. "Can your ship still jump to hyperspace?" "If the engines hold together, but we cannot abandon the station survivors." Sarah was already working at the console, coordinating the evacuation with Captain Rodriguez. "We won't abandon anyone. Both ships will jump together, carrying everyone we can save. And the raiders?" Through the viewport, they could see the sector ships closing in, their weapons charging for final strikes. But in the distance, the station's central core was building toward critical overload. "They're about to have bigger problems," Sarah said grimly. When the station's reactor finally went critical, the explosion lit up space like a newborn star. The shockwave caught the raider ships at close range, their shields collapsing under the tremendous force. All three vessels went tumbling through space, their hulls cracked and systems failing. Both the Galactic Harmony and the Night Hunter had reached minimum safe distance just in time, their combined passenger loads consisting of nearly everyone who had been aboard Station Concordia. It wasn't a perfect rescue, but it was far better than anyone had dared hope. As the two ships limped toward the nearest inhabited system for repairs, Sarah found herself once again face to face with Grackmore in the Night Hunter's medical bay. Zethkar was unconscious, his injuries more serious than he'd let on, but the ship's medics assured her he would recover. The Great Wolf had not left his bondmate's side, but when Sarah entered the bay, Grackmore's attention shifted to her. Those intelligent golden eyes held something that might have been gratitude or recognition or something deeper. "He knows," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Dr. Webb entering the medical bay, his arm in a sling but otherwise unharmed. "Knows what?" "What you risked to save them. Animals understand sacrifice in ways humans sometimes forget. You put yourself in danger to save his packmate. In Grackmore's eyes, that makes you pack too." Sarah looked back at the massive wolf, remembering that moment in the conference chamber when he had first acknowledged her. Had he somehow sensed even then that she would prove herself worthy of pack status? As if reading her thoughts, Grackmore rose from his position beside Zethkar's medical bed and approached her. This time, there was no hesitation in his movements, no careful assessment. The Great Wolf simply walked up to Sarah and gently rested his massive head against her side. The gesture was one of complete trust, the kind of affection reserved for family. Dr. Webb smiled despite his injuries. "I think you've just been adopted by the most feared predator in known space." Sarah reached out tentatively and stroked the soft fur behind Grackmore's ears. The wolf's eyes closed in contentment, and she could feel a deep rumbling that might have been purring if such a sound could come from something so fierce. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," said War Alpha Zethkar's weak voice from the medical bed, "you learn what it truly means to be pack." 6 months after the incident at Station Concordia, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the heart of the Cathara homeworld's capital city, watching something that had never been seen in the species' recorded history. A human walking freely through the sacred pack grounds, accompanied by a Fenris wolf who wore no bond collar. The crowds that lined the ceremonial pathway were silent, their amber eyes wide with awe and confusion. Some had traveled for weeks just to witness this unprecedented event. Others, high-ranking Cathara nobles and military commanders, watched from balconies with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. At Sarah's side, Grackmore moved with the fluid grace that had become so familiar to her over the past months. The Great Wolf's golden eyes scanned the crowds with casual alertness, but there was no tension in his massive frame. He was exactly where he belonged, and everyone present knew it. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Webb, who walked slightly behind them as part of the official human delegation. "Terrified," Sarah admitted quietly, but also honored. The ceremony they were approaching had no precedent in Cathara culture. The Council of Alphas had spent months debating whether it was even possible, consulting ancient texts and questioning the eldest bond pairs in their society. Some had argued that what Sarah and Grackmore shared was an abomination, a corruption of the sacred bond that held their civilization together. But War Alpha Zethkar had championed their cause from his recovery bed, and his voice carried significant weight. More importantly, Grackmore himself had made his choice clear in ways that no Cathara could ignore. The Great Wolf had simply refused to bond with anyone else. In the weeks following the Station Concordia incident, as both species worked to establish formal diplomatic relations, Grackmore had become increasingly attached to Sarah. When she returned to Earth for debriefing, He had fallen into a depression so profound that Zethkar feared for his bond brother's life. When she returned to Kithra space for the formal treaty negotiations, the wolf's joy had been visible to everyone present. More disturbing to Kithara sensibilities, Grackmore had begun displaying protective behaviors towards Sarah that he had previously reserved only for his original bondmate. When a group of hardline Kithara politicians had confronted her during one particularly heated negotiation session, the wolf had positioned himself between them and the human ambassador with unmistakable intent. The message had been clear: harm her and face the consequences. But the defining moment had come 3 weeks ago, when Zethkar had officially released Grackmore from their bond in a ceremony that left half the observers in tears. The War Alpha had knelt before his lifelong companion and spoken the ancient words of separation, freeing the wolf to choose his own path. Grackmore's choice had been immediate and unambiguous. He had walked directly to Sarah and placed his massive paw on her foot, claiming her as his new bondmate in full view of the assembled Kithara nobility. The silence that followed had lasted for nearly a full minute. Now, as they approached the steps of the great temple, Sarah could see the council of Alphas waiting in their ceremonial robes. At their center stood the Supreme Alpha, an ancient Kithara whose bondwolf was so old that his muzzle had gone completely white. This was the being who would decide whether their unprecedented relationship would be officially recognized. The ceremony itself was surprisingly simple. Sarah knelt on the ancient stone platform while the Supreme Alpha spoke words in the old tongue that had been used for thousands of years to sanctify the bond between Kithara and Fenris. When he reached the part traditionally spoken by the wolf's original species, he paused and looked at Sarah expectantly. She spoke her part in carefully rehearsed Kithara, promising to honor the bond, protect her companion, and accept the responsibilities that came with pack membership. Her accent was terrible, but the meaning was clear. When the Supreme Alpha asked if there were any who challenged this bonding, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Several of the hardline politicians looked ready to object, but Zethkar's steady gaze seemed to discourage them from speaking. Finally, the ancient leader turned to Grackmore. "And do you, last son of the Shadow Mountain Pack, accept this human as your bondmate? Do you choose her freely, without coercion or obligation?" The great wolf's response was to rise from his sitting position and walk to Sarah. With the same gentle care he had shown during their first meeting, Grackmore placed his massive head against her shoulder and made a sound that was part howl, part song, and entirely beautiful. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Cheers erupted from the younger Kithara, while the elders nodded their approval. Even some of the politicians seemed moved by the obvious sincerity of the bond. The Supreme Alpha raised his staff for silence. "Let it be recorded that on this day, the human Sarah Chen has been accepted into the pack of Grackmore, Shadow of Death, and through him into the greater pack of all Kithara. Let none question her place among us." What followed was a celebration that lasted 3 days. The formal treaty between humans and Kithara was signed with fanfare that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Trade agreements were negotiated that would benefit both species for generations to come. Cultural exchange programs were established that would see young humans learning alongside Kithara cubs, while Kithara scholars studied at Earth's greatest universities. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came on the final evening of the celebration, as she sat in Zethkar's private quarters, sharing a meal with her new packmate and his former bond brother. "I still don't understand how this happened," she admitted, scratching behind Grackmore's ears as he dozed beside her chair. "What made him choose me?" Zethkar considered the question while sipping his fermented fruit wine. The War Alpha's injuries had healed completely, but he moved with a slight stiffness that would probably never fully disappear. I have given this much thought, he said finally, and I believe it comes down to recognition. Recognition? Grackmore saw something in you that first day. Something that resonated with his deepest instincts. You showed no fear, but also no aggression. You offered respect without submission, strength without dominance. In our pack dynamics, such behavior marks one as alpha material. Sarah frowned. But I'm not trying to be an alpha. I'm just trying to do my job. Exactly. Zethkar smiled, showing his pointed teeth. True alphas do not seek power for its own sake. They accept responsibility because someone must, and they are capable of bearing the burden. Grackmore recognized this quality in you immediately. What he's saying, Dr. Webb interjected from across the room, is that you're a natural leader who doesn't let it go to her head. That's apparently very attractive to giant space wolves. Grackmore opened one golden eye and made a sound that might have been amusement. But there's more, Zethkar continued. When the raiders attacked, you risked everything to save not just humans, but Kithara as well. You treated us as equals worthy of sacrifice, not as aliens to be abandoned for convenience. Such loyalty is the foundation of all pack bonds. Sarah thought about that as the evening wound down. When she finally retired to her assigned quarters, Grackmore followed as he always did now. The wolf had claimed a corner of her room as his own, though he usually ended up sprawled across the foot of her bed by morning. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah found herself thinking about the long road that had brought them to this point. The failed first contact mission that had somehow become the most successful diplomatic venture in human history. The desperate battle that had forged unbreakable bonds between former strangers. The impossible friendship that had grown between a career diplomat and a creature that most humans would consider a nightmare. "What do you think, boy?" she asked the great wolf softly. "Did we do good?" Grackmore's response was to rise from his corner and pad over to where she sat on the edge of her bed. The massive creature rested his chin on her knee and looked up at her with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. In their depths, she saw affection, loyalty, and something that might have been pride. But more than that, she saw acceptance. Complete, unconditional acceptance of who she was and what she represented. "Yeah," Sarah whispered, stroking the soft fur of his massive head. "We did good." As news of the successful human-Kithara alliance spread throughout known space, diplomatic missions from dozens of species began requesting formal meetings with the Federation. Everyone wanted to meet the human who had accomplished what many thought impossible, earning the respect and friendship of the galaxy's most feared warriors. But Sarah's greatest pride wasn't in the accolades or the career advancement that would inevitably follow. It was in the quiet moments like this one, when she could sit with her unlikely companion and know that they had built something extraordinary together. The universe was a vast and often hostile place, filled with species that viewed each other with suspicion and fear. But sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you could find common ground in the most unexpected places. Sometimes you could find family among the stars. And sometimes, if you showed enough respect and courage, even the fiercest predator in the galaxy might just decide that you were worth protecting. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, with 300 pounds of deadly Fenris wolf serving as her willing guardian, she couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, and new opportunities to prove that humans deserved their place among the galactic community. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, pack-bonded to a legend, surrounded by allies who had become friends, and secure in the knowledge that humanity's future among the stars had never looked brighter. In the corner of the room, Grackmore settled into his watchful rest, golden eyes remaining half open as they always did when his bondmate was vulnerable. The great wolf had found his purpose again, and it was everything he had hoped for and more. The human had chosen him just as surely as he had chosen her, and their bond would endure long after the stars themselves grew cold. That was the way of the pack, and that was the way it would always be.